Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. On behalf of IOM, the Missing Migrants Project, and ICRC's Central Tracing Agency, I'm very happy to welcome you to today's online dialogue on missing migrants, missing solutions, preventing and resolving missing migrants cases, and addressing the needs of their families through the Global Compact for Migration. My name is Julia Black, and I am the coordinator of IOM's Missing Migrants Project based at our Global Migration Data Analysis Center in Berlin. I will be co-moderating today's discussion with my colleague Florian von König, who is the deputy head of the Missing Persons Project at the International Committee of the Red Cross in Geneva. This session today is part of the Migration Dialogue series organized by the UN Migration Network in the lead up to the IMRF, the International Migration Review Forum, which will take place at the UN General Assembly in New York this May. First of all, thank you all for joining what I am very confident will be a concrete and very productive discussion on the actions needed to achieve Objective 8 on missing migrants of the Global Compact on Migration, which of course includes saving lives, but also establishing coordinated international efforts on missing migrants.
Thank you, Julia, and greetings from the ICRC here in Geneva. We have a packed agenda today. We will hear from the Deputy Director General of IOM, from the Vice President of the ICRC. We have an extremely distinguished panel of experts that we will discuss with that will cover a range of issues, from families of missing migrants to the international legal framework to initiatives currently evolving in Africa to the Americas, and an initiative there that is showing very promising results. And this panel will be followed by a question and answer session that all of you are welcome and invited to participate in. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Ugochi Daniels, the Deputy Director General of IOM for Operations, and hand over the floor to you, Ugochi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florian. And I don't know what I did wrong. I see that my name appears as Julia Black, but I can assure you that I'm not. I'm Ugochi Daniels, the Deputy Director General for Operations here at IOM, and very pleased to be able to address this panel. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 4 years ago, member states committed to saving lives and established coordinated international efforts on missing migrants through Objective 8 of the Global Compact for Migration. While this framework evokes a moral and humanitarian imperative to prevent loss of life and other tragedies during migration, sadly, more than 47,000 people have died during migration journeys worldwide since 2014, according to the Missing Migrants Project. These grim figures do not include the thousands of migrants who go missing alive each year, whether detained or stranded, hiding for fear of arrest or deportation, or unaccompanied children who've lost contact with their families. Scenes involving dozens and sometimes hundreds of migrants lost at sea or on land have become all too frequent. Women, men, and children are facing unspeakable peril in pursuit of a better life. For sure, states rightly want to assert their sovereignty and make migration orderly and regular, but they also want to make it safe. Everywhere, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Sahara Desert, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Andaman Sea, from the Darien Gap and across the Americas, every day, people suffer, die, or disappear along perilous routes. Behind every individual disaster lies a web of relationships irreparably impacted, a litany of grief, mourning, loss, and in the most elemental of ways, abandonment. It's time today to translate the commitments made through the Global Compact into meaningful action. We say migrants because each of them is a human being and not merely a statistic. People whose lives should not be reduced to curt categorizations. Since 2018, many governments have revised policies and practices to better protect migrants. But too often, civil society has had to lead the way in the absence of government action. And even with that, much more still needs to be done. COVID-19 has dramatically reduced the already limited opportunities for regular migration, pushing more people to take unsafe, irregular routes and rely on smugglers to facilitate their passage, putting them at greater risk of disappearance and death. In many parts of the world, some governments continue to adopt restrictive migration policies, increasing the risk of migrants dying or going missing. So with the first International Migration Review Forum fast approaching, we should ask ourselves today, during this dialogue, how we can achieve greater focus and results on Objective 8 of the Global Compact on migration. The IMRF provides a great opportunity to advance on this objective. In his recent report on the implementation of the Global Compact on migration, the UN Secretary General acknowledged that Objective 8 of the Compact had received too little attention from governments, with very few examples of concrete actions by governments reported in the 2021 regional reviews. As such, the IMRF is an occasion to revitalize this commitment. In the report, the Secretary General listed several recommendations to encourage concrete commitments in advance of the IMRF, including the need for greater efforts to save lives and track missing migrants. Preventing the loss of life of migrants is one of the report's key features. The SG urged governments to develop clear, safe, and predictable disembarkation mechanisms for those rescued, ensuring migrants are disembarked in a place of safety in accordance with obligations under international law. He also called on governments to stop obstructing and criminalizing humanitarian efforts aimed at providing life-saving assistance and to safeguard human rights along migratory routes. The SG, however, also highlighted areas of progress, including on support to migrant victims of trafficking and evidence that can reduce the risks of human smuggling. Yet, despite this progress, too often, migrants are subjected to violation of their rights, including as a result of aggravated smuggling or trafficking. Building on the SG's report, the heads of the UN Network on Migration's Executive Committee, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, and the International Commission on Missing Persons released a joint statement on Monday on the need for immediate action to save lives and prevent migrants from dying or going missing. In this statement, our organizations provide a set of actionable commitments and recommendations inspired by the SG's report, which should be prioritized to prevent migrants from going missing or dying, to search and identify those who have gone missing or died, and to acknowledge and address the plight of families. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not be distracted by the real issue underlying missing migrants. While search and rescue remains a critical undertaking, we should collectively reflect on the drivers that push migrants to take dangerous routes and means in the first place, and that create the space for criminal networks. And this is the lack of regular and safe migration channels. We should thus explore ways on delivering on the commitment to enhance availability and flexibility of pathways for regular migration if we are truly concerned about the loss of life in migration. As clearly expressed in the SG's report, states are urged to assess the consequences of restrictive, deterrence-based migration-related laws, policies, and practices. It's time to take bold decisions and open regular migration channels so that migrants do not need to resort to deadly routes. Our organizations acknowledge that saving lives is not the sole responsibility of governments. A collective multi-stakeholder response led by states, but where local and national actors play an important role, and the voices and engagement of affected families is urgently needed. Learning the innovative work of civil society organizations, such as those we will hear about in today's dialogue, and include non-governmental actors in action on missing migrants, are also critical. Upholding the human rights of migrants at borders and along migratory routes should be our utmost priority. If we fail to protect the lives of thousands of migrants, we will fail to deliver on a most fundamental commitment enshrined in the Global Compact on Migration. In 2018, we committed to saving lives and keeping migrants out of harm's way. Today, we must also uphold our fundamental responsibility to make migration safe. Let's use the opportunity of the IMRF to make commitments to decrease this number in 2022 and increase the number of migrants gaining access through regular migration channels. Thank you very much for your attention, and back to you, Florian.
Thank you, Ugochi. Next, we will hear a few opening words from Gilles Carbonnier, the ICRC's Vice President.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear Ugochi, dear colleagues and friends, I'm very glad to see IOM and the ICRC co-organize this webinar on a key global humanitarian concern, missing migrants. More people than ever are on the move today as a result of armed conflict, violence, and climate change, as well as the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. At the same time, migration policies are becoming increasingly restrictive in many parts of the world. That leads migrants onto perilous, irregular migration routes with greater risks to their lives and well-being. For the ICRC and the broader Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, with national societies in more than 190 countries, let me tell you that assisting and protecting vulnerable migrants is a pressing humanitarian priority. Among the many vulnerabilities that migrants face, the risk of going missing is of particular concern. The fate of missing persons and their families has been at the heart of ICRC's work for more than 150 years. It is why the ICRC urged states to include the obligation to save lives and focus on missing migrants in the Global Compact on Migration. I was in Marrakesh in November 2018 when 164 states adopted the compact. At the time, there was a sense of real optimism. We were expecting more determined international response. However, the numbers that Ugochi has just quoted tell another story. Countless individual lived stories, some of which I could witness last year in Central America, the Sahel, and Libya. In Honduras, for example, families holding the photos of their loved relatives who disappeared while heading north. Families demanding to know what happened to them. In Mexico, Haitians telling me about many fellow migrants who died while crossing the Darien Gap. Children, women, and men trying to move towards North America. In Texas, forensic anthropologists seeking to identify a growing number of dead migrant bodies close to the Mexican border. In the Sahel, in Agadez, Nigerian migrants who told me about their friends who died in the Sahara Desert. In Libya, forensic experts seeking to identify human remains brought back to the coast. But I also met with officials and policymakers who truly cared about this tragedy unfolding, but were unsure about how to try and address it. Ladies and gentlemen, the presidents of the International Committee of the Red Cross and the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, as well as the heads of the agencies of the UN Migration Network's Executive Committee, have expressed a deep sense of urgency in a joint statement. A global and meaningful response to the tragedy of migrants dying or going missing cannot be put aside any longer. Our discussion today will, I'm sure, be a step towards greater awareness of the issue. All too often, this issue remains out of sight and neglected. Addressing this challenge is imperative for all states, including those of origin, transit, and destination. Global Compact's Objective 8 sets very clear steps not only to prevent deaths and disappearances, but also to ensure that life-saving assistance is provided by states and humanitarian actors, and that families of missing migrants get answers about the fate of their loved ones. The ICRC stands ready to advise states to ensure that their migration policies are in line with international law and do not raise the risk of migrants going missing or dying. Where migrants go missing, we can provide expertise and cooperate in the creation of international mechanisms through which information on missing migrants and unidentified human remains can be shared. We can strengthen capacities at national level, including in the forensic field, to identify missing persons. Finally, we urge states to pay greater attention to the plight of families of missing migrants. They have to deal with the unbearable uncertainty over the fate of their loved ones and face many other challenges, including to sustain livelihoods. I look forward to today's discussions. No doubt that all of us will gain renewed impetus so that the International Migration Review Forum next May charts a clear pathways towards implementing the Global Compact's objectives to prevent and resolve the case of missing migrants and to assist their families. I thank you for your commitment and your good work.
Thank you. So in his closing words, Gilles highlighted the very real impacts of this issue on families who have lost a loved one during migration, many of whom remain searching for answers. To illustrate this point before we get into the full discussions today, I'd now like to share a video with the voices of two parents in Tunisia who are looking for their sons who went missing while trying to reach Europe.
كانت عندهم حلمة مش يخرجوا لبرا، باش يصلحوا شوية من وضعيتهم، باش يعيشوا كيما اللجان الكل.
أنا كي تو مثلا طلع مضمون نلقى ولدي حي مازال، كي نبدا في البلاد يقولوا لي البركة فيك، لكن وفون في الحقيقة في الريال اللي بالوراق يعني اللي هما مش متوفين، يعني عبارة واحد ولا متناقض، يعني نهار يقول لا ولدي توفى ونهار يقول ولادي ما توفاوش.
بجاه ربي قولوا لي انتوما ولاد زوز ولاد هذوكم هما الكذيبة، معناها أنا شهرين معناها من اللي سمعت نقول لا دين برك بربي نحب النار اللي في قلبي تبرد. سي بون اتاكدت اللي هما ولادي.
فما عباد تلوم عليه قالوا لي كيفاش عادة تمشي ولادك انت حليت لهم عينيهم. قلت لهم يا ولدي هذوكم اصحابي واخواتي وولادي، خاطر هما مش معايا انا كي ولدي يعاوني في البحر، انا مش معايا كي ولدي يهزني لبوجا. انا ريت تويك ما فهمتش هز لبوجا، بقول كان جا ولادي لهنا راه وازوها لي لبوس الكاس. يعني شوف انا ترى المصيبه شنو هو؟ المصيبه مش نحكيو على هادي ومهدي. توا المصيبه الموضوع هذايا هادي ومهدي فيه الموضوع هذايا، نحكيو على الالاف. نحن نحكيو على الالاف اللي كيف هادي ومهدي، ولا السباب نتاعهم نفس اللي مشاو قبله واللي باش يجيو راهو.
As you can see, the death or disappearance of a migrant, of a person, has absolutely devastating impacts on their family. And we thought that this is a perfectly good starting point for our discussion today with our three distinguished panelists. And I would like to start with Gabriela Citroni. Gabriela, you are a professor of international human rights law in Milano. You are also, as of last year, a member of the United Nations Working Group on Enforced and Involuntary Disappearances. And we're very glad to have you with us.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And Gabriela, if I may, you have spent many years, in fact, working with families of missing persons, of missing migrants in different contexts. Maybe we could start by having you explain to us the impact that the disappearance of a loved one, in this case of a migrant, has on a family, and also link to the families, the roles that families should have in the response to the issue of missing migrants.
Thank you again, Florian, and greetings to all those participating in this event. I think taking the floor after such a powerful video makes it a bit more complicated on the one hand, emotionally. On the other hand, maybe a bit easier to illustrate and to capture what you were asking me, the consequences of the disappearance or of a loved one going missing. And I would summarize it in three main lines. On the one hand, you do have the anxiety, the suffering, the loss, the fact of being stuck between hope and despair. This sort of emotional limbo, not knowing whether your loved one is alive or is dead. And it is worth pointing out that no matter if this happened in 2019, as in the video we've seen, or in 2017, that's an ongoing pain. That's an everyday pain. There is a second layer, which we've seen as well in the account of Hedi and Mehdi's father, the practical ordeal, the bureaucratic struggle, the absurdity of not being able to qualify a person of whether they're dead or alive, this legal limbo, with all the consequences that this entails, that may be inhuman per se. But there is a third layer, which is the one I honestly have seen and admired in the different countries I've been working on this issue. That is the resilience, the courage, the sense of solidarity, the empowerment that comes out of this suffering, and the fact of being at the core of search efforts. And these would answer to the second part of your question, where or what is the role that families should have. For me, they should be at the core of any effort, of the efforts of states, of the efforts of other stakeholders, international organizations, NGOs. No answer, no reply to this very, very human suffering can be effective unless it takes into account these aspects and is led by the families.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. I think that really helps to put ourselves a little bit in the situation that families face when this happens. Of course, you're also an international lawyer, and even your engagement with and for families has had this aspect. And so I wonder if you could explain to us a little bit. I know it's a big question in a short time, but the international legal framework that we're looking at here, because it's important to remember this is not taking place in a vacuum. There are any number of principles that apply here.
Yes, thank you. And here I would take a part of your question to reflect upon. It has been said at some point that this matter, this phenomenon, is somehow invisible. I would contend this, and I beg to disagree with that statement. Maybe the invisibility is just a misunderstanding, and when it is dealt with, it is often dealt with either to criminalize or demonize the phenomenon itself, but it is very visible. It's simply that we are not looking in the right direction oftentimes. And legally speaking, what I would say is that instead of focusing on the invisibility or pretended invisibility, we should focus on the obvious vulnerability of those who are involved. Legally speaking, if we recognize this category, not only those who are on the move, the migrants, but also their families are particularly vulnerable, this, legally speaking, brings obligations, enhanced obligations, precisely because they are especially vulnerable. We do have a number, and this would take hours, so I'll try to summarize, but we do have a number of principles in soft law, but also hardcore law and treaty law. And if, again, I do have to summarize, we go from prevention. So prevention that is all-encompassing, preventing people from going missing, preventing people from dying, or preventing people from having to undertake those perilous journeys, which also goes hand in hand with the kind of migration policies that are designed. Then we do have intertwined with the prevention, the obligation to protect. This goes as well hand in hand with rescuing and saving life, if that is the case and if that comes into play. If a person goes missing, there is a clear obligation to search for that person. And here I would particularly emphasize that any search effort should encompass, and again, going back to the first answer, put at the core the families and their needs, which goes to the third layer as well of obligations. There is an obligation to assist relatives in the ordeal that we've seen, in their search for, in the struggle. And when I say assist, this is quite broad, because this is psychologically, this is socially, economically, since they are facing that kind of ordeal. In some cases, when migrants go missing, this encompasses the perpetration of gross human rights violation, including enforced disappearance. On this, for instance, the working group, the UN working group on enforced or involuntary disappearances, of which I'm a member, in 2017 published a specific report. Well, when these kind of gross human rights violations are at stake, then there are also obligations to investigate, identify those responsible, and hold them accountable, because through accountability, we aim at further prevention. And this finally brings also reparation with itself.
Thank you so very much for this. And of course, we all know that the the law is one thing and the compliance is another thing. And I think we'll probably agree that the area of missing migrants is a particularly difficult area. But that allows me maybe to move on. Thank you so much, Gabriela, for this. This would allow me to move to our next panelist. We're very, very glad to have Maya Salih Fadel with us from Algeria. Commissioner, you are the Vice President of the African Commission on Human Rights, Human and People's Rights, of which you are members since 2011, and you are also the African Union Special Rapporteur on refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, and internally displaced persons. And we're extremely grateful that you took the time to join this panel today. Welcome to you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. And I maybe would like to start by saying that you are the initiator, you're behind a resolution that was passed last year by the African Commission on missing migrants and refugees in Africa and the impact on their families. And this resolution, amongst other things, contains many of the principles that Gabriela just mentioned. And I wanted to ask you, what led you to propose this resolution on missing migrants for Africa?
Merci beaucoup, merci beaucoup. Merci de me donner la parole.
Thank you for giving me the floor. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for the webinar's organizers, and it's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. It is indeed a question that, or an issue that is striking as a rapporteur. As you said, I'm working for several years now about the African issue in Africa. This is something that attracts the attention of the states as well as the African Union, and the African Commission has had to study the topic through studies, press releases, etc. This is a peculiar context, I would say, that led me to appropriate the missing migrants issue. There was a segment that was somehow forgotten or put aside, invisible, as it has been said, which are the missing migrants. From 2015, I would say, the medias have started to deal with this topic, especially those who are crossing the Mediterranean Sea and who are disappearing, because we knew they were leaving, hundreds of them were leaving the African coast. We didn't know if they were safely arrived, and some of them had disappeared. So through the role of the medias within my role, I've had to organize several meetings and webinars around the topic. I have been interviewing people coming back to Libya, returnees to Libya, who had been explaining to me how some of their colleagues, so to speak, had gone missing. And some of them indeed had suffered gross human rights violations. And basically, what they were telling me, these returnees, was the following: if I had to go back, I would. So you can see that anyhow, those people want to try again, despite all these stories. I've also met families in Gambia, and as it's been said before, these families are still waiting their relatives to come back. Father, brother, daughter, who have decided to start the migration journey in the sub-Saharan countries to, at some point, arrive in a destination country in Europe, but who unfortunately didn't manage to. So the families were really going through an ordeal, a continuous ordeal, because once the person has disappeared or once the person is missing, forced or not, the person is missing and the family is suffering because they don't know where their relative is. Through all that, we've decided to adopt the 486 resolution in July 2021. And within this resolution, we've tried to deal all the worries about missing migrants. In the preambles, we are dealing with two special topics: the number of missing migrants in Africa, and we were aware also that some specific measures have to be implemented in order to avoid and to prevent the missing migrants. Anyhow, the resolution was adopted, but what have done the states with this resolution? Because we draw their attention on missing and dead migrants. So what happened? What did the states? What is the current situation nowadays in Africa? Did these states, as well as other players, take the issue seriously or not? So there are two approaches to this question. On one hand, some states, indeed, I'm talking about African states, country of origin, country of transit, as well as destination country, all of them. So there are two types of states. States who have acknowledged this phenomenon of missing migrants and who have acknowledged as well what the families are going through. We don't have many of these states, I must say, because in the sub-Saharan and Northern Africa, the migration issue is still, I would say, a taboo. So no states have adopted a national strategy on migration, migration policies. They haven't either led to an assessment on the implementation of the Global Compact. Many states are reluctant to do so, I would say. So this is one group of states, and then you have, as I said, some states who are aware, who have acknowledged this situation, who are trying to adopt some measures, and I would say they are aware of that through the organization of civil societies. I would say that what the civil society organization have done around this topic, listening to families, trying to give answers. Through this action, the national authorities have had to give an answer and to be proactive. So this is the current situation that we are experiencing right now in Africa. For a lot of civil society organizations, we can see that they're trying to draw the attention of states to work on prevention, as it has been said earlier on, but also on the protection and the obligations that the states should be taking.
And there would be so many questions that we could discuss based on what you've just said. I take note, you mentioned there is a number of states who are interested, who are willing to take efforts. There are other actors, notably in civil society. And as we know, it is by definition a cooperative venture. This is not something that can be done at a national level alone. So I wonder if you have any thoughts, in particular, obviously from your African perspective, what is the potential role for regional actors in Africa to work with and to support states and other actors to actually put in place an effective response?
Merci beaucoup. Effectivement.
Well, thank you for your question. This is a really current question because we're talking about prevention as well as case resolution. From the regional perspective, I would say that we have a structured architecture. We'll start with the African Union as the regional integration organization. So within the African Union, we have the African Framework for Migration, as well as an action plan 2018-2030, which is a really interesting framework that that deals from an exhaustive point of view with the migration topic, but they are right now working on the implementation of the Global Compact on migration, because the African Union has expressed its positioning on the topic, which means that the Objective 8 related with the survival of migrant and missing migrant is a topic that has been on the table within the African Union. First important point. Then we have the CER, Regional Economic Committee, that could play a role. I'm thinking about the CDAO in Western Africa. And some migrants are leaving the Atlantic coast to reach the Canarian Islands. This is a migration pathway that is pretty new in Africa. We used to have the sub-Saharan country reaching Europe. So within the regional economic committees, we've had to deal with migration policies as well as the resources available to work proactively on the migration topic, considering as well the missing migrant issue. Within the regional authorities, we also see the bilaterality between African Union as well as European Union, because a lot of missing migrants are disappearing in Mediterranean Sea, in the Atlantic Ocean, as well as in the African sub-Saharan country. The relationship between the European Union and the African Union has been debated recently in Brussels. And the idea here is to reorganize the migration policies between the African Union and the European Union. The idea is to focus on an important objective, which is to organize a real international governance around migration, regular and ordered, without forgetting the missing migrant and their families who are still hoping to see their relatives again.
I think you have literally just laid out an entire agenda to work on for many of us, I hope. And I think it really underlines the challenge that we have now, which is we have the Global Compact. It is a global instrument, and now we need to bring it down to migration routes, to regions, to sub-regions, and to trans-regional efforts. And so everything you've just said, I think, is really important to keep in mind in this regard. So thank you very much once more for your intervention. And with this, I would like to turn to the Americas, which is obviously another region that has seen massive migration movements in recent years, and unfortunately movements which were accompanied by large numbers of disappearances and death. Just to put it into perspective, just last year, IOM recorded about 1,250 migrant deaths in the Americas. That is more than in any of the previous 7 years, and we all assume it's a vast undercount. And as many of you may be aware, a particularly current and dangerous route is the Darien Gap that connects Colombia and Panama. And before we turn to our third and final panel member, we wanted to share with you a testimony that was filmed of a migrant from Haiti who had made her way through the Darien Gap and who recounts what she lived through, and I think it's a very moving video to watch. So we'll briefly focus on this.
Moi, je suis pendant 10 fois dans route là. Son la vie mieux n'a chance parce que pas tout le monde est à l'aise. Les moi prend route bois, route là pas de bon moi même du tout. Route là très dangereux, mais nous prend route là, son route risquée villiers. C'est la vie ou la mort. Il y a des personnes qui nous crient en pile. Nous dit si la caille nous était bon nous t'a prêté. Mais son circonstances qui vraiment dit son risque et nous résister nous faire. L'autre haïtien beaucoup témoin qui était beaucoup témoin dans Chili. Qui parle de route là y apprend. Non, on connaît des vidéos mais yo pas montre Jean bagay yo montre moun yo gen petite machine y a monté. Après ça do pas grand dans route là. C'est l'autre dans vraiment causer ya ou vinn ouais ko to prend. Tout le monde plein de ça. Tout le monde désire qu'on ça va route là te va prendre. Tout le monde. Pour que on monde monter on fait 6 heures de temps monter. Moi même pas capable moi même fait 12 heures de temps moi monter. C'est une route qui t'a plat, c'est pas une route mode. Si route là t'es plat, pas de problème si route là t'es plat, nous te gen la boue, nous pas de problème. Mais c'est parce que route là dit cochi et puis il gen monde, gen côté qui très glissé ou pas capable là-dedans. C'est grâce à un monsieur mari moi qui très patient, qui fait moi pas mourir, qui aide moi, petit parti, pas me fait 14 jours dans route là. Glo a manger, mon yo a manger. Vous comprenez moi? Oui, en pile. Faut aller apprendre mon la violer. Et puis ouais mon coucher camper dans bois et puis mon voler trop violer devant. Et puis deuxième mon côté voler à on petit petit qui a une crise, je demande monsieur ça vite la game. Monsieur a pas d'espagnol, il dit oui, il dit si. Et puis voilà bobo le tirer. Troisièmement et puis mon monsieur qui a entré dans de l'eau et puis côte balle cassé, typique la saute tomber le mourir et monsieur a plongé, monsieur a tout mourir l'oral, monsieur a mourir. Pas ça au mourir. Ça va faire plaisir.
Right. That was a very depressing experience, and unfortunately an experience that is shared by thousands of people today. And in many ways, similar experience have been happening in the Americas and elsewhere for a long time. And that brings me to our third panelist today, to Mercedes Doretti, who's currently in New York. Mercedes has been working on the issue of missing migrants for more than a decade. Mercedes, you are the Central and North America director of the Argentine Forensic Anthropology team. For those who don't know, the EAAF, it is really a central institution in forensic-driven efforts to deal with missing person caseloads in migration and in other contexts. And Mercedes is also the coordinator of the Border Project, and it's this initiative that we are particularly interested in today. The Border Project brings together families, authorities, and civil society from several countries in Central North America with the aim to find and identify missing migrants. Mercedes, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Florian, and thank you very much for inviting us here. And good morning on this side of the Atlantic for everybody that is in the conference.
Great. Let me start with maybe by asking you, you started the Border Project, I believe, in 2009. And what were you setting out to achieve, and how does the project work?
Yes, we started the project in 2009 as a result of a different problem that we were working in the border between Mexico and the US that had to do with the identification of women remains, of female remains, of a victim of feminicide. And this place we were working in Chihuahua, it was not a main point of entry to the United States, but it was an area that attracted a lot of people from different parts of Mexico and Central America to work on assembly plants that were set up right at the border. that's when working on these feminicide cases, we realized that we were not going to be able to identify the remains, or most of them, if we didn't include a migration perspective as part of our investigation. As a result of that, we start, because people were coming from different parts, right, of Mexico and Central America, of that corridor. So we start requesting support from all these different countries, and we realized that there wasn't a regional system in place to exchange information on missing people and unidentified remains, that it was exactly what we needed, that the system was fragmented into the information was in many different state and non-governmental institutions, in committees of families, that it was very hard to cross the information because it was so fragmented in different ways. We decided to do a more in-depth approach, conducting an assessment for a year, going through the whole region of Central America, Mexico, the US, interviewing families, kind of similar to what Special Rapporteur Sally was mentioning, interviewing forensic people, families, NGOs, government agencies, to try to understand what were the main problems and how could eventually, in one part of it, we could help. We took many conclusions out of that assessment, but some of the main ones had to do with that we couldn't control how the different morgues where the remains were arriving that could belong to missing migrants were doing their work. But we could work on the side of improving the quality and the amount of information on missing migrants so that those institutions working with remains that could belong to missing migrants could have strong information that could help us to cross it with the remains that they have and eventually producing identifications. I have to say that as a forensic person, we work on the forensic side of the problem, which doesn't mean at all that these migrants need to also be searched, as considering the possibility that they are alive. We just work on the forensic side because that's our area of work. So as a result of this, we created what we call forensic data banks of missing migrants that are formed precisely from governmental and non-governmental actors, mainly on the non-governmental side, families, which, as it's been said before here, are crucial to understand part of the problems that we're facing to try to find missing migrants. The families have tested the system, and so they understand where are the main problems and the bottlenecks that they help us to work on. So we co-created with organizations on the countries of origin of the migrants, which have the obligation to search for them, but also where the majority of the families are, these forensic data banks on missing migrants that essentially collect information about the disappearance, the physical information on the migrants, and we added the genetic component to them, testing the families of the missing migrants as one of the most effective identification methods and in forensic sciences. So up to today, we have recorded 1,640 cases of missing migrants, just the tip of the iceberg, but still coming from more than 10 different countries, and collected 4,260 genetic profiles that we have processed already of their relatives that have been crossed against unidentified remains, resulting in 261 identifications up to today. So it's approximately 15% of all the cases, a very low, if you'd like, percentage, but a percentage that shows that it's possible to do it, and that with further cooperation and regional cooperation and similar mechanisms in place, it could significantly increase.
Thank you so much for this message. And I really think what you described is really an invaluable precedent that should really inform efforts in potentially in other regions of the world, because you have shown over 10 years that this can be done, as you just said. You also mentioned 250 identifications, which to my knowledge is pretty much the largest number of identifications of any ongoing efforts to identify missing migrants. On the other hand, it is quite a limited number still. So what are the main kind of, briefly, if you can, what are the main obstacles that you're still facing 10 years into your effort?
Yeah, I'd like to focus on two main problems. One is the exchange of information. mean, now that we do have very solid, and good quality information on missing migrants, the following problem is how to cross that information. We know that the identification of remain is always a comparative process, right? Where we exchange the information coming from the missing person with the information coming from remains that may belong to that person. So that exchange is where we found right now a lot of problems we've been finding over these years, particularly because of the multiplicity of databases and the lack of more centralized databases where to cross the information. In other words, in order to cross the information that we bring from Central America or from different Mexican states with Mexico and with the US, we have to cross it with many different US states, morgues, Mexican morgues, and millions of different little crosses of information. We favor what we call a large-scale crossing of information or massive crossing of information. That is, for example, crossing those 4,000 profiles that we have of relatives of missing migrants against, whatever number we have, a large number of unidentified remains that, because of the place where they were found and the circumstances, could belong to missing migrants. The larger the number of information that we cross, the more chances we have to increase the number of identifications. So it's essential to have regional cooperation and regional dialogue between all the states and actors, governmental and non-governmental, and again, families being at the center of that, to create this exchange of information. Yeah. On our corridor, after many years of work, finally, over the past 2 years, we've made significant progress with the US through the help of the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights. The US does have a national database, both on DNA and on general information on missing people. But unfortunately, for many years, we could not cross in a large scale the information that we were bringing from Mexico and Central America. Finally, a new agreement has been reached. And so we're going to start being able to do that larger scale crossing. And in Mexico, that also lacks up until today a large national DNA database. Last year, national roundtable have been created for migration. So we hope that those two new mechanisms can really significantly improve the possibilities to identify remains. And the last thing that I will mention is to disaggregate data, to separate the data that may correspond of missing migrants from missing people in general, in regions like in our corridor, where in Mexico right now, the number of missing people in general reached 98,000 people over the past 15 years, to disaggregate from that big number, the ones that may belong to migrants, and do the same with the bodies. Disaggregate, separate the bodies that morgues receive that may belong to missing migrants because of the place where they were found, the circumstances of their death, and so on, which will facilitate searching for them, comparing directly with those set of remains, and producing statistics. And a big problem that we have also on the issue of missing migrants, statistics of what is the size of the problem. This on itself could also help on designing public policy.
Thank you so much, Mercedes. And if we had time, I would love to go on because what you have achieved is rather impressive and path-breaking. But I think we need to move on. Just to keep in mind, really, what has happened here is a civil society actor has really managed to put in place a system whereby information collected by the EAAF and others, by families, ends up being compared to governmental databases in other countries. That is quite an achievement, and it really shows you how a multi-stakeholder logic can deliver on this issue. We're short on time. I will, just before handing back to Julia, who will moderate the Q&A session, I just want to say that this example of the border project is one of the many examples that over the last 3 years, we at the ICRC, in cooperation with the IOM Missing Migrant Project, with EAF and many others, have looked at. And we have produced and published 3 guidance documents on missing migrants that we very much hope will help countries and other actors to implement objective aid that build on these experiences. And these are guidelines on how to create transnational mechanisms along migratory routes to cooperate in the search for missing migrants. There's another document on how to interact with families of missing migrants who obviously face very specific challenges in this very difficult, complex migratory context. And the third one is a kind of a core data set that we hope will help to homogenize, to harmonize information that is collected by different actors, because that's really a key requirement to be able to compare it. And the links are in the chat. And with this, a huge thank you to our 3 panelists for your interventions. And I should just add that you obviously remain with us. And if there are questions that are directed to you, I'm sure you could answer them. And with this, thank you so much. And over to you, Julia.
Thank you, Florian. And my thanks as well to our really outstanding speakers for this important discussion. I will now open the floor for a Q&A discussion. We have about 20 minutes. So how this will work is I will ask you to raise your hand. I will call on you. I will ask you to unmute yourself. And when you do unmute yourself, if you can briefly introduce yourself and let us know to whom you're introducing the question, that would be much appreciated. So I can see already Mr. Fernando de la Mora. If you can unmute yourself, that would be very welcome.
Muchas gracias, señora moderadora, y gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Thank you to the network as well for having called for this preparatory dialogue. Clearly, migrant people represent a particularly vulnerable group of society when it comes to disappearances, not just within the context of the pandemic, but including beforehand as well. You know, there's a language barriers and different types of discrimination, and they might not know the context of the country that they're migrating into or transiting through. This could obviously place them in vulnerable situations. So the General Secretary's report basically shows us the whole piece of work we still have to do. And in Mexico, we're very clear on the challenges that we face at the different stages of migratory processes. And as a result, we therefore take on the responsibility of having to come up with these relevant and effective actions so as to be able to live up to our commitments to promise safe migration and to look for migrants that have disappeared on Mexican territory in every single case, never mind what their migratory status or situation might be. I just want to speak about the general law that we have as regards disappeared people, disappearances undertaken by individuals, etc. We've been able to typify, we've been able to classify the different crimes. Nevertheless, as regards the case of migration, the challenge comes when you actually have to guarantee access to family members to these mechanisms, and that's why we've been able to promote 3 mechanisms that what they do is they link these things up. One is the search table for disappeared people. Second is the interinstitutional group work to look for patterns of migrant people that have disappeared. And the third is the external support mechanism for search of information. And we also have an additional protocol which is specifically for little boys, little girls and teenagers. And so I think it's very clear what we said in this panel. There are legal responses, but there are also loopholes and there are gaps here. We need to have that, we need to be able to glean information from the technical know-how of people like the IFRC and the wealth of experience of the civil society as well, civil society organisation, to such a point that we can see that the IMRF is a great space so as to identify those alliances that are going to allow us to move forward towards our fulfilment of Objective A of the Global Compact, in which we still have a long way to go, but which we have full political will to comply with. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Senor de la Mora. I think that's, it's fantastic to hear all of the work that Mexico is doing on this issue, and in particular that it is taking a child-sensitive approach, and one that learns lessons from the families and from civil society as well. Next, I can see Ms. Susan Bro. If you can unmute yourself, that would be great.
Yes, good day, everybody. Yes, I'm Susan Bro. I'm a professor of international law at the University of Victoria in Canada and a board member of Every Casualty Counts in London. And I've spent the last 15 years writing about dead casualties of armed conflict. And I became involved in a project in London called the Last Rights Project, which had some influence on the drafting of this objective in the Global Compact. And I'm very proud of that work. And I just wanted to commend Professor Citroni's presentation and just support her on, because it's a bit lonely work. We spend our time looking at papers instead of talking to all of you, which is such a joy today to hear the practice of what goes on. But I just want to emphasize that it is my view after all these years of research that it is an international legal obligation, not only to prevent the migration, not only to respond to migration catastrophes, including the one we're seeing in Ukraine as we speak, but also to search for the dead and the missing, and to bury them with dignity, and to notify their families as to their fate, and to, if at all possible, return the bodies to the families, and if at all possible, to notify them of the location of their graves. And I think this is so important because for years I had to argue, people thought I was on the fringe of international law, because it's not the right of the dead person. Of course, I accept that, but it is the right of the family members. It is an international legal obligation. And my view is it's a global responsibility. Thank you very much. And I just want to say that the work the Gabriella's Commission has done on the missing and the disappeared has enhanced the legal obligation in this area. And it's so important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. And I'm actually very pleased to see that Katrina already posted the Last Rights link, because I think the work that you have done on the Mytilene Declaration, which really lays out the legal rights of the dead and of their families impacted by this, is one of the most seminal works on this issue. Next, I have Yahya Andu with a hand up. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah. In beginning, I want to thank all of you. I'm Yahya Andous. I am a founder and board director of Lifeboy, Libyan nonprofit organization concerned about illegal immigrants. From the beginning, when I started in this field, I just have one question. If the European Union able to receive all the people from Africa, all the immigrants, why they make it hard? Why they didn't have, we didn't have a legal way to go there, to work, to study? Why are we suffering to get the visa? Just one question, and I hope if there's an answer for my question. And thank you all.
Thank you, Yahya. I mean, I think that is the key question here. Why are there no safe legal routes that, would allow people to not, risk their lives to find a better home? I, obviously am not a policymaker myself, nor are any of us on the panel. I'm curious if any of the panelists would like to respond to this. If so, please go ahead. If not, perhaps I can just say that, of course, this is really the only way to prevent deaths in the long term is to provide safe legal routes. And this is something that we have called for consistently as IOM, and also in the most recent UN Migration Network statement, along with ICRC, the Red Cross, Red Crescent Societies, and the International Committee on Missing Persons, which is directly in response to GCM Objective 8. Unfortunately, it is also the reality that, while this topic is seeing increased attention perhaps in the media, it is also the topic which received the fewest responses from states as part of the IMRF voluntary review. So there is clearly far more that needs to be done on this issue. Perhaps next, I see Laurel Townhead, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. My name is Laurel Townhead, and I'm the Human Rights and Refugees representative at the Quaker UN office in Geneva. And thank you all for the excellent presentations, the excellent questions from the floor, and a really moving and sobering discussion, but with some brighter spots in it about the progress that's being made, about the good practice that can be drawn on. We're really pleased to see the attention that came to this issue in the Secretary General's report, in the statement from the network, ICRC and the IFRC, and in this discussion today. And we believe that the IMRF can and should be leveraged for improved responses, drawing on the kind of expertise and discussion that's been had today. But lasting change, as you've just been talking about, lasting change is going to take more than this focused attention around this period of time at the IMRF. Follow-up action is needed to ensure that it's harder still for states to look away from this issue, having looked more closely at it again, so that in 2 years at the regional reviews and 4 years at the next IMRF, we're not having the same conversation about why these issues are getting less attention than others. So our question really for you as moderators for the panel is, what actions or commitments would you like to see in the progress declaration of the IMRF or in pledges around the IMRF that can support sustained attention, can provide expert analysis, and can foster dialogue with the aim of preventing loss of life? We're interested in the idea of a mechanism like a high-level panel on preventing deaths in transit that could maintain the attention and engage the political will that's needed to turn that stated determination to save lives into effective action to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laurel. I mean, I think that is the question. So if you don't mind, also just being conscious of time, I will wait and ask Marisol to intervene, because I would actually like to leave the panelists to answer that one last, because I think that's a great note to end on. So Marisol, please go ahead.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días. Soy
Thank
Marisol.
you very much. I'm Marisol Mendez for Justice Foundation in Mexico. In our region, I think from family committees and different organizations, we organize several public policies for the search of missing migrants and for investigating. We have several mechanisms in Mexico supporting. We also created a table for searching missing migrants. But there's a big challenge that we should handle in the IMRF, and it's in terms of migratory policies. From families and civil society, we work and we cooperate in the design of these policies to have a better coordination between the different actors. But we also see that migrant policies are becoming stronger from the states and for all the countries that receive migrants. In Mexico, there's an increase of militarization, which increases violations of human rights and missing people. And as experts say, when we evaluate the pact, we have to see how to avoid these measures that are stronger and stronger in order to have problems and violations of human rights. We have several policies in Mexico that can be revised, and the challenge that we have right now is that both international bodies and committees and associations can have a word in these policies because they generate dangers for these people that are in mobility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marisol. I think, unfortunately, with that, I have to close the questions because I also want to give the panelists enough time to respond. So there are sort of, there were a number of fantastic interventions and questions raised in this. I think, in particular, the point made by Marisol that not enough is being done as called for in the UN Secretary General's report to prioritize search and rescue, life-saving assistance over deterrence-based policies. And then as well, the question we had from Laurel Townhead on, in your view, what are the interventions, the concrete sort of sustained and sustainable interventions that are needed to really address the issue of missing migrants? So I'll let Gabriela respond first.
Thank you very much. And I apologize in advance if I won't have the perfect answer because these are very, very pertinent questions, but also not so easy to really address. I would have 4 points to make also to try to encompass the interventions made. First, I have to say that I left out something in my presentation at the beginning. I do think that there is also an obligation across those that I presented to cooperate. And for this particular issue, that's crucial because without cooperation, that can be humanitarian, but also mutual legal assistance, the other obligations that I enlisted would be empty at the end of the day. And I wanted to mention that because this is also relevant to touch upon the other 3 points I wanted to make. I really do hear you, Susan, and you're not alone. I'm not alone. Today I feel quite happy about this. But the point you are making is really crucial, and I do think that we have to take it as a starting point. The respect for the dead, no matter which religion, philosophical belief, or whatever, is a basic human value that we all share and that we would have to uphold. And in this context, to keep it as a reference and to enforce it, again, cooperation would be a key component. Without that, in this specific context, it would be impossible. To Yahya, I wish I had an answer to what you asked. I ask myself the same question, and being you from Libya and me being from Italy, I truly ask myself the same question each and every single day. I would just say that we do have other human rights, in particular obligations in terms of non-refoulement, in terms of how we do deal with pushback policies. And when these obligations are not upheld, which might well be the case, then there are some mechanisms that can be actually activated to react to this. I would like to prevent rather than react. But as my grandmother used to say, a little something is better than nothing. So activating those mechanisms could be a way to push states to actually respond. And this leads me to the last point. I don't have, again, the perfect answer to Laurel. A high-level panel might be a good idea. And I would emphasize two components. On the one hand, a mechanism that I see maybe as a multi-stakeholder, because as what we heard from Mercedes, if we have only state or only civil society or only international organizations, this is not going to work. So I truly think it would be a stakeholder mechanism, includes families in the design, to avoid what Marisol was illustrating, because otherwise we risk designing very nice and fancy things that are not going to be implemented. And that mechanism should also bear in mind the need, which I see as an obligation, for accountability. Because no matter how we design things, if we don't implement them, then this is an empty promise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. Yeah, I mean, I think that cuts to the heart of it in many ways. I see that Mercedes, you have your hand up, so maybe I will let you respond, and then we will turn to Commissioner Saleh for the final word.
Yes, just thank you very much. Very briefly, in terms of more permanent mechanisms, and on the side that we work on the identification of remains, to create regional mechanisms that will be permanently established as long as we have migrants going through those corridors to exchange information on missing migrants and unidentified remains that may belong to them. It's not very complicated to do it. It's possible to do it, multi-stakeholder, with families, governmental and non-governmental entities involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercedes. So, we have some long-term challenging steps, and we have some steps that can be taken right away. I mean, which is what we need. No, we need action now, but we also need sustained action. Commissioner Saleh, I will give you the last word on, the concrete intervention.
Merci beaucoup.
Go ahead.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, je vais également répondre.
Thank you very much. I would like to answer the question that has been asked to us, which is a complex question, and that refers to the complexity of migration in general. What could be the involvement and pledges from the states. On the African continent, what's important is that the states could, first of all, talk and speak without any kind of taboo. So it would be an exchange of information, networking, that is important, and that within a country or within several countries, we could create mechanisms that would deal with this topic. When I say within the countries, I'm talking at the local level. So the cities, the small villages, we should have the community leaders that should be involved, religious leaders as well, that could talk about the missing migrants. So the national level is important, as well as the local level, and of course the cross-border level, cooperation between states, implementing mechanism, texts, as well as framework to think about the missing migrant issues. That would be at the African level. In relation with the African Union policy, provided that right now in Africa, we've created an economic free trade area, and this African market should work in parallel with the free circulation of people, free movement of people. But that hasn't been ratified everywhere because we would have to deal with the causes of migrations. Second point, cooperation with other partners, thinking of the European Union, for instance, because what's weakening this topic is the bilateral relation with the European Union, with the countries, between African countries and the European Union, because a lot of countries in Africa that have had to agree on bilateral agreements to manage migration, but these bilateral agreements didn't reach their objectives, didn't match their objectives. So we shouldn't either forget that all these processes have to be inclusive processes. You have to include NGOs, civil society organizations, humanitarian agencies, regional organizations, regional authorities, as well as representatives from missing migrants' families. all that to implement mechanisms that could deal with this topic. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Saleh, and to all of you who asked a question, and to our panelists for fantastic answers. In case we did not get a chance to hear from you today, we do also have a discussion space, which was just posted into the chat, and we we are there waiting for your questions, wanting to discuss with you. So I would encourage you to post there as well. We only have a few minutes left, and now I have the, even more difficult job of summarizing a complex discussion on an even more complex issue in just a few moments. But let me see what I can do. This is a very real issue. We heard, from many experts, we've heard, videos of families directly impacted, migrants who are directly impacted. And unfortunately, this discussion highlighted that progress on Objective 8, on solving the very real issues of missing migrants, remain limited. But at the same time, I'm very thankful that we had this discussion today, because I think it did highlight some clear and concrete steps that can be implemented now to kickstart progress on this. So I'm thankful to our speakers for that. I'm thankful to Gabriele Citrone, who really stressed the centrality of families on this issue, and of course the very real legal obligations of states to prevent deaths, to protect migrants, to search for those who have died and gone missing, and to assist the families impacted by this. I'm also thankful to Commissioner Salih Fadel for her insights on the importance of regional coordination, illustrated very aptly by her work on the African Commission on Human and People's Rights resolution, but also just now on local interventions as well. And I think this need for coordination, not just across, geographical space, but also across sectors, with states, with international organizations, with local bodies, with non-governmental organizations, with families, is really illustrated best by, the Argentine forensic anthropology team's work on the border project. And I think, in the short term, Mercedes's, concrete steps on data disaggregation really can be done immediately to meaningfully change the situation now. We are almost out of time, but I just want to highlight that, of course, this is a complex issue, and I am very thrilled to see that so much attention has been generated around the lead up to the IMRF. But as illustrated or as mentioned throughout this discussion, it can't just be, May and then over. This is a long-term issue that requires long-term solutions. And states ultimately are the ones who need to uphold their legal obligations and their commitment in the Global Compact for safe, regular, and orderly migration, to address the ongoing crisis of missing migrants and the impacts on the families left behind. Florian, do you want one last word before we finish?
Yeah. Thank you, Julia. And no, really just one thing. You just mentioned states. We've talked a lot about states today. I can say I'm very happy to see a lot of familiar faces, many colleagues, partners, people that we've worked with over the last couple of years. There are a few states here. That is great to see, and we're extremely grateful. But there are many states who are not here, and I think that is one of the biggest problems we face, right? Because ultimately, it is states here who have to do a lot of the work. We're here to work with them, but we need states to act on this. And today just shows how big that challenge still is, to really mobilize states on this important issue. So that for me is going forward into the IMRF and beyond, really what all of us hopefully have to work together on, to be better at this. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to you all. And like I said, the discussion space will continue. And of course, our work on this issue will as well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.